why is this falling apart in this way? Because fascist movements do fall apart. They're very hard to sustain. They're not popular for long enough. If you're going to be a fascist, start with a clear majority. That's my recommendation to any of you budding fascists out there. But which this guy clearly did not. He did not start with a clear majority. He started with a minority that has been dwindling. His polling numbers are in the tank. Public sentiment research is all very clear.
Frank A. Spring is a founding partner with Altima Insight, a public sentiment research firm dedicated to understanding deep narratives that drive people's attitudes, values, and behaviors. He's also the managing partner and co-founder of Undaunted Ventures and serves as the in-house mad scientist for both Altum and Undaunted. He's had senior roles with progressive campaigns and candidates on both sides of the Atlantic for more than 15 years, during which he spent more than a decade developing the unique science-based method how to build and understand political narratives. He lives with his family in native New Mexico, where he eats green chili every day. And Frank is my favorite person to talk to because he's much smarter than me and he has all kinds of information. So I am excited to have you back on the show.
It is so good to be back, Molly.
Listen, I quote you all the time. You make me slightly smarter by default, just knowing you. So I'm always.
That shows a generosity of spirit.
No. Well, listen, it's been a busy week. It has been a busy week in the last day, right? It feels like what a time to be alive. One of the things that you said to me on our last interview, you said fascism never lasts, and I think about that often because it helps me when I look at some of this stuff and my heart rate goes up, my blood pressure goes up, and then I'm like, this can't last. And we're already kind of seeing that, right? We're already seeing some, unwinding of the core here.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, what are you seeing?
I think that's right. This week and last week, and you're absolutely right, it's been a hell of a week today. I think will be looked on as kind of an inflection point for the whole authoritarian Trump project. Because I really do think it is starting to come apart at the seams. And I've been sort of thinking about where did all of this start? And the evidence for it falling apart at the seams is if you can't get a comedian canceled on his own show for more than 4 days before everyone involved has to back down, and not just back down, but back down with their tail obviously between their legs. The FCC, Brendan Carr saying his threatening remarks were really just a joke, right? That's the classic fascist playbook, incidentally. I will kill you, and then someone says, I'd like to see you try. Oh, I was just joking. We're going to invade Chicago. Come and find out. Well, no, actually, we're really thinking more about Memphis. This is, there are other examples being turned back in the courts. There's a bunch of other stuff that has happened to the Trump agenda, which indicates that it is not going especially well. And that's before we get into some of the stuff that's happening internally within MAGA world, which we should also talk about. But I've been thinking about why is this falling apart in this way? Because fascist movements do fall apart. They're very hard to sustain. They're not popular for long enough. If you're going to be a fascist, start with a clear majority. That's my recommendation to any of you budding fascists out there. But which this guy clearly did not. He did not start with a clear majority. He started with a minority that has been dwindling. His polling numbers are in the tank. Public sentiment research is all very clear. This guy is now less popular at any point for a president during this point in their administration, and of any president since we have been counting the numbers, including his first term. He has now surpassed himself. The big guy does it again. He is now the least popular president in history by the metrics that we now use. And I think a lot of the problem that we're seeing, the clear problem is persistently high prices made worse by his own policies. And there is some evidence that voters are drawing a connection between those two. That line, based on the research that we've done, this was a little bit earlier this year. It wasn't 100% clear. We weren't seeing a lot of people saying, I am paying more because of Trump. But there was some of that. And there was a fair amount of I am paying more during Trump, which is a big enough indictment. That's one of the things that cost Biden and later Kamala Harris the election in 2024. So the economy, particularly cost of living, still very much on everyone's minds, not getting better, not getting worse. And in the meantime, Trump is pursuing a policy agenda that looks to a Democratic eye like what he was promising all along. The occupation of Los Angeles, masked men kidnapping people off the streets, very likely war crimes committed on the Caribbean seas in the name of the war on drugs, I guess, but maybe also containing migrants. Hard to say, but certainly we are shooting some people with missiles. Not entirely clear who. All of this stuff looks like stuff that I think, to the eyes of a lot of Democrats, seemed like what he was running on, but to the eyes of a lot of people who voted for him, and to a lot of people who tacitly accepted that he would be elected, they didn't care. They didn't care enough to vote against him. This is not what they were hiring for. Incredible as it may seem, and the data from last year is reasonably clear on this. Stuff that we found, the stuff that we're seeing now supports this. The assumption was he would bring prices down and he would get the political vibes, which were very bad in 2024 and had been bad since COVID, that he would get them back to normal. That we're going to get people back basically on the same page. There's a little bit of a rose-tinted glasses from his first term. We're going to bring the prices down. We're going to get everyone back on the same page. We're going to bring the political temperature down. Everyone's going to get along better. And instead, the exact opposite has happened. While he has been pursuing this strange authoritarian, alien in many respects agenda, unfamiliar to most Americans who just didn't think this is what they were going to get.
Yeah, I mean, even 20 minutes after Charlie Kirk was pronounced dead, he went on television and said this is the fault of the radical, violent left. And it's like,
Yeah.
a week
Oh, yeah.
later, I saw a poll that said GOP women, like the approval rate of like where the country is headed, like tanked. Like that's not it, because now you're going into people's houses and dividing them too, and you're immediately blaming somebody before, it just creates all this doubt, right? And that's just one tiny example of saying one thing, then saying something else, and then they keep dividing their base over and over again.
That's right. And they're slicing it thinner and thinner because, I think what we are really seeing in this form of the Republican Party that took office in January of this year is the unholy alliance of the first Trump administration, which is again an extraordinarily right-wing entity, every bit as xenophobic as it was made out to be, every bit as venal and corrupt and all the other things. But that has gotten a lot of its energy, has sort of fused with the Republican Party that emerged out of COVID, which got a lot of its energy and its direction and scored some of its earliest wins thanks to anti-vaxxers and Moms for Liberty, which is sort of, people with very specific, I'm using that word very kindly, but very specific, very niche cultural axes to grind. And they really kind of, they gave the Republican Party a shot in the arm in 2021 when they helped elect Glenn Youngkin as governor of Virginia. And again, I think it was not so much about him and his virtues and the energy of their party as where the Democratic Party in Virginia was at that specific moment. But these people have kind of the QAnon sect, as you and I were talking a little bit before you started recording, and you mentioned QAnon. That's right. Epstein obsessives. Which is, that is coming back. That we've seen exactly what happens, when you play with that particular fire. So you're bringing in all of these kind of fringe figures, and the agenda this administration is pursuing is one that would not scan as familiar, certainly wouldn't scan as normal to most Americans who, again, we've seen are very, very clearly focused on the fact that it's too goddamn expensive to be a person in America anymore, and that is continuing unabated while the president does all these other things. And to give you a really sort of clear and specific example on this thing, when he appears with Robert Kennedy Jr. in a public statement to promote this this bogus finding, there's just no scientific basis for it whatsoever. This belief that that pregnant mothers taking Tylenol could lead to autism in their children, as part of this strange anti-autism fixation of RFK's and of his. That it's not that anti-vaxxing, and the sort of the larger, and I really do think it is kind of anti-autism and anti-autistic. And I say this as someone with autism in my own family. There is a very strong sense that the idea is this is a group of people who are being dehumanized. Mm-hmm. Their existence has to be prevented. It's a shame that they ever were. Like, that's really kind of the subtext of all of this. When the president of the United States stands up to tell you shouldn't take Tylenol when you're pregnant, even though there's no reason why you shouldn't, there's just none whatsoever. Can't read the word acetaminophen, sort of mumbles his way through his public statement. That is the integration of genuine fringe, weird shit into the formal policy agenda of the presidency of the United States. And it is very hard to keep a political project going when that's all you do instead of the thing that people elected you to do. And we are really starting to see the consequences of this. And in some respects, it was entirely predictable that this would happen, but the way it's happening and the speed with which it is happening has at least caught me somewhat off guard.
Yeah, I mean it's like such a dark sky out there, right? And you're like, God, we got to deal with this for 4 more years. But then you're like, well, maybe not because it seems to be
Mhm.
crumbling so fast. And I think that these like other elections, smaller elections in these other states are showing it because it's like 67% Democratic vote. I mean, like we're winning these other offices by landslides right now because I think it's going to be a pendulum swing to the other side. I
Oh,
don't
that's
think.
absolutely right.
I don't think RFK and them realize like everybody has somebody autistic in their family at this point. Like you always have. You just thought your grandpa was weird, but turns out he was like, you know what I mean? Like we
Yeah.
just
Oh,
have a
yeah.
name for it, but like you can't go into people's homes and continue. They're dividing everybody on every angle. So then you're like, well, me and my brother are fighting about this, but then this happened this week, so now me and my brother are aligned again. Like you're going into people's homes and trying to divide them. So you're not going
Yeah.
to maintain that base. You
That's right.
know?
And it presupposes that people have an endless appetite for being told that they should be mad at new things, many of which are familiar and pleasant to them. You shouldn't watch Jimmy Kimmel anymore because he didn't think about Charlie Kirk the right way. He didn't talk about Charlie Kirk the right way. First of all, a lot of people watch Jimmy Kimmel. The data on Charlie Kirk is very clear. The public polling that came back shortly after his murder, almost no one knew who he was, and most of the people who knew who he was didn't like him.
Right.
Right. The idea of setting up this one of articulating the supremacy of the memory of this one figure who was barely known outside of a small pocket in America, and versus a late night television show host. I mean, and this also shows the extent to which Trump's capabilities are diminished because for a long time he at least understood who was popular and who wasn't. He could calculate who was big on TV and who wasn't. And he could suck up to the people who were, and he could fight with and he could piss down on the people who weren't. But he doesn't understand this anymore. I think there's a none. This is sort of on the subject of his own personal decline and his inability to calibrate. I don't think he was ever, frankly, up to keeping a coalition like this together, but he certainly isn't now. And I think there's a good argument to be made that when he was speaking at the UN today, he may not have known where he was for portions of that speech. He certainly didn't seem to. He wasn't talking to them as if they were at the UN. He was going through his usual list of domestic grievances, complaining about environmentalists and how they won't let you have cows anymore. We don't like cows anymore. I mean, just his usual kind of maundering stuff. And this is clearly the leader, the big guy, is clearly diminished. He's unable to pick the right fights anymore. Doesn't have the energy to see them through. And the people around him are on too many different pages. And the whole administration leaks like a sieve. The leaks are getting worse, not better. And we know that there are profound disagreements within departments, screaming matches, and to the extent that this was ever one team of sort of fringe-oriented odd figures, it is rapidly fracturing into a bunch of different teams all vying against each other. So this thing is going really badly. To your point that we have 3 more years of this, we do. There's nothing we can do about that. There are going to be 3 more years of this thing, most likely. And winning elections is great. Winning the midterms is going to be very important. I think as a people, we need to prepare ourselves for the reality that a lot of the worst parts of this is just going to continue. I'm not making light of the fact that there's going to be worse ahead of us,
Hmm.
and the bad stuff is going to keep going. Real lives destroyed, lost, people impoverished and immiserated. All that is going to happen. The challenge for us as well, and this is the perfectly named podcast on which to ask this question, is what happens afterward. Because I think we can begin to see. I hope that some of your listeners who might at one point have been wondering, are we going to make it through this? Maybe now, looking at the way this project is breaking up and how unpopular this guy is, the American people are really clearly resolving they do not like this man. They don't like what he's selling. We are going to get through this as a people, and the question is what we do next. Because if the idea is we're gonna take it back to just the way it was before, that period is gone. That's over, right? Where we were before is done. We're going to have to build something new, and I sort of hope that that's the next act of political progress that we make from this particular moment is that we prepare to tell ourselves a new story or a new chapter in our unfolding story as a country.
Yeah, I was definitely feeling like maybe America won't even exist anymore when people are like, we just have 4 more years. And I'm like, wow, that's optimistic. But I'm starting to feel like, yeah, the wheels are coming off too fast. and in regards to everything, right? You know, how many Americans are just now realizing that we've been giving Israel money for 50 years? How many Americans are realizing that Israelis have free health care and we're still
Mhm.
sending them money when we, like the bigger picture, and people are being forced to have conversations they were never having before, right?
That's
Even with
right.
their own family members, their children, their grandchildren, whatever, where they're like, did you know this? And so I think Americans are becoming a lot more, I wouldn't say educated, but aware of a lot of what the government is doing that's not serving the American people. And that's a big factor that they didn't even have accounted for, I don't think.
I
You
think that's
know?
right. Oh, yeah. I mean, this is a period when, and again, this is a man with a hammer who sees a nail. Everything to me is about stories, the base language of human communication. Everything's about narrative and understanding the narratives we tell ourselves, the narratives that other people tell themselves, and kind of how we form our identities that way. We are living through a period in which the old stories aren't true and we can't pretend they are anymore. And the example you just gave of Palestine and Israel is a really good one because we could see this during the earliest days of the of the conflict and genocide, of the action in genocide, of the action in Gaza, and the unfolding what is now clearly a genocide in Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there was a real you could see a generational difference between people who had grown up with the understanding of Israel as a nation of, citizen soldiers formed in the wake of an unspeakable tragedy for the protection of those people who were prepared to stand up to protect themselves and their rights so that never again could they be threatened with industrial murder against surrounded by people who would gladly have pushed them into the sea, and who, with their allies, the United States, were able to carve out a home for themselves. Right? That's a very sort of classic Boomer and Gen X story of Israel. And the thing is, it is not without its truth. Right? There is an element of truth to that, and also. We started to see within millennials and Gen Z and people whose political consciousness and kind of awareness of the Near East, and particularly of Israel, was formed during the Intifadas and afterward. It's a very different understanding, right? The Israelis don't appear in that story as the heroes, they just have a completely different understanding of who is the protagonist of the story and who is the antagonist, and kind of what are the stakes here and how this could be resolved. And I think what is beginning to be clear is, wherever people started on, October 8th is now, the old story of what Israel was, and kind of the values that it was meant to have lived by, whatever its history has been, however you want to view its story up until that moment, its conduct since then raises questions about whether that story was ever true. And maybe it was, or maybe it wasn't, but it is not. But it is whatever it was, it is not true now.
And a
And then
whole
the question is, what do we do next?
Right, and
Right?
a
What do
whole
they
new
do next?
generation of people are even learning about Israel. I remember getting into it with somebody on social, and they're like, "You know how much money we're sending?" I'm like, "Do you know how much money we've been? This is not like
Right?
you
This
need."
is not a new thing.
Like,
Yeah, exactly.
I
It's not a
agree
new
with you, but
thing.
like, you rewind the clock 50 years. This is not a new thing. What do we do next? Well, I think about this a lot. Like, I think about last year I went to the Leadership Institute dinner with my dad. He's a big donor, and he invited me. And he's getting old, so I'm just trying to spend time with him. And I
Sure.
intentionally didn't Google it because I didn't want to know what it was because I knew I would just show up pissed off.
Mhm.
And it's a right-wing conservative group. They've been around for 50 years. They get a lot of money donated to them, and they take in a page out of the Scientology playbook. They take these young conservatives and they groom them to fill seats on, school boards, city
Mhm.
councils, small elections, whatever. And like they created Riley Gaines. Like it's the
Mhm.
same type of group that created Charlie Kirk, right? And so, like, in this strange world, I have a little bit of empathy for Riley Gaines. She spoke at that event, right? And I had
Mhm.
heard of her, but I didn't really know much of her. And the thing that stood out to me is she said, and she's the one who won fifth place against the transgender swimmer. And now she's made her whole
Mhm.
career out of hating transgender people, which like it started out as like her being a girl from a small town and a good athlete and protecting girls in locker rooms. And it started from like a good place, right? But like
Mhm.
just got like they came in, they swooped her up, they groomed her, and she said during her speech that she went to 290 college campuses and spoke last year.
Yeah. Yeah.
So people like Charlie Kirk and Riley Gaines, they have been groomed to be exactly what they are. And Riley Gaines has now spoken to hundreds of thousands of people closer to her age. she can't really turn back. Her life is over. She has
Hmm.
one option. It's the Fox News desk, and that's it. Her family's life is going to be disrupted. She has a little sister who's just turning 16. It's over for them. And is it really her fault? No. She got swooped in by these people with a bunch of money, who see are in nice suits talking about conservatism, because from the outside, it's a very well-to-do organization. It's not like the QAnon group. It's not that. It's like lots of people with money and power and suits, and they've been around a long time. And even at the dinner, they didn't talk about Biden. They didn't talk about any of that. They talked about conservative values in America. Like, it's
Hmm.
really polished, so there's nothing offensive about any of it.
Hmm.
But this is what they're doing, right? And that's what Turning Point is doing. It's doing the same thing. It's this indoctrination. So, like, you look at those debates, but it was just Charlie Kirk bullying 19-year-olds. There was no debate
Right.
about it. But he was groomed in that position, and I feel like we're not doing enough to like engage people to like even understand what is the importance of running for city council or school boards, or right, like why aren't we doing the same thing? Why aren't we educating and grooming people to be these next things instead of the status quo of the Democratic Party? Because I mean, like David Hogg, right? They didn't like him, and for some reasons that are good and some reasons that are bad. A lot of people didn't like David Hogg, right? Like, he came from a very rich area, and like, whatever. I'm not gonna
Hmm.
talk shit about a kid who was in a school shooting. So, but everybody's got their problems. But like, is he the only one? Like, well, then who's this next generation? Who are we inspiring? Because that's what they're getting right. And now they said that there's like 3,500 new Turning Point applications since Kirk's death. Well, where's our turning point? Where are
Right.
we fighting these things?
That is a fantastic question. And I think it reflects the extent to which the right and as a political project has been going on for 50 years, right? The plan to take out Roe, the plan to take out Roe v. Wade was 50 years in the making, right? Like, they had a strategy. The NRA has pursued guns the same way. They've had a long-term strategy, and it helps to have money. Like, it's funny to think about this now because the Democratic Party does not have a money problem. The actual technical Democratic National Committee has a money problem. Money is usually tied for the losing party immediately after the presidential election. The money's gone to other places. So it would be wrong. I should just say every last Democratic entity is flush with cash. That is not true. But for the most part, the Democratic Party is no longer facing the severe money disadvantage that always characterized it in every election and at every level for most of the early part of my life. By the early part of my life, I mean, well until I was a grown person. And that is so. It's funny to think about that. That has changed. Democratic presidential apparatus, the campaign, and all of this related entities raised and spent $1 billion last year. Right, like, this is a big entity, and we still don't have that long term. We haven't there. There are long lived democratic organizations that are designed to do good work, but it's interesting but when you sort of think about, like, what is the large presence on college campuses or with young people?
Right.
The Republicans have always been better at that than we have been. And the entities that register most young people on college campuses now are nonpartisan organizations, and they're good, right? Like, League of Women Voters would be a good example of that. I think they do a fair amount of this. I might be conflating them with another one, but there are a lot of nonpartisan voter registration organizations out there, and the reason that is you can get a lot more money and it's easier to operate under legality. It is much easier for nonpartisan organizations to register voters and to get money to register voters. Voter registration is just one angle, but
Mm-hmm.
as a result, you have a huge number of people who register. This is what, among young people, we see a huge number of people who register as independents, decline to state, whatever the nonpartisan option is, in part because their first touch with respect to actually becoming formally involved in electoral politics is with a nonpartisan entity. And I'm not suggesting that's any great evil. And at the same time, because the student registration is hard. And again, voter registration is not the only thing you can do. Turning Point is a really good example of that. They didn't actually do a ton of that. It's mostly
Right.
kind of persuasion and media.
Mm-hmm.
But doing college work, doing youth work is incredibly difficult. It's only getting harder, actually, as the attention economy becomes that much more fractured and that much more complicated. All the more reason to make those investments. So on the youth side, we are as a political project, decades behind the curve on having a well-funded, media and persuasion-oriented youth mechanism. And I think some of it has been, I have to say, a fair bit of complacency on the part of the political class to which I belong. This
Hmm.
sort of assumption that, like, well, young people are more liberal, which they are, in spite of talks about how Gen Z is, there was all this talk about how Gen Z was getting super conservative. Still the most liberal generation by a significant margin, the men too.
Right.
They're still quite progressive. But this assumption like, oh well, because young people are progressive, are naturally progressive, we don't really need to worry about them because they'll just come home to us. That doesn't mean they'll vote for you. That doesn't mean they'll like you. Like that doesn't mean that you're built like you're not in. We aren't engaging them in the same sort of active, coordinated, professional way or with anything like that approach. The other thing is, I'm glad you brought up Riley Gaines because this also shows, just as a kind of messaging recommendation for Democrats, there's a ton of mileage to be gained by advocating for things the way they already are, as if they weren't. So what I mean by this is, if when Democrats have never been able to figure out how to talk about trans athletes, which is a
Hmm.
shame because it's actually because it is a ginned up issue designed to dehumanize a class of people. That is really the totality of what it is. If Democrats, and we see this in the public data, we've seen this in some of our own stuff. If you say, well, what we really need is a system where, if you have to have been, if you are, if you transitioned from, male to female and you are competing in a female sport, you have to have been, through gender affirming the process, you have to have been on the hormones for a certain period of time, long enough for your any athletic advantage to have been eroded. That's the system we really need. And you will get a ton of agreement on that, and that seems to mollify the issue. That's what we already have. And we
Right.
saw this, like, that is the system that is already in place. That's why this is a nothing issue. And we see this it is a ginned up issue designed to find a way to like provoke a controversy and again, dehumanize a class of people. This also works on immigration. If you stand up and tell people what we need is a good, strong, orderly system and describe the exact system that was in place in 2022 or 2024 even, what you'll find is you'll get broad agreement with it because actually the way the system is supposed to work is extraordinarily rigorous. It has been in its, there have been some failures in its application. It is not sufficiently funded. There's all of this problem with like how it works. There are way too few judges. There's all the stuff you would need to make that system work. But the design of it is at least as rigorous as pretty immigration skeptic people would want it to be. So it is really funny. There are places where the system actually works, and Republicans have been able to conjure the image that they haven't, and Democrats have been unable to find a way to defend reality as it exists. It is a fascinating problem that afflicts the party.
Yeah, it's like he said on the last time, Democrats are bringing that feeling or facts
Facts
to
to
a
a feelings
feelings
fight. We love
fight,
to bring
right?
facts to a feelings fight. We can't even muster the facts on those. We just sort of like it's like we're caught flat-footed.
Well, and people are so focused on, these fear-mongering tactics, but when it boils, yeah, I mean, it's it's so frustrating. It's incredibly frustrating, right? And you think about, trans people, it's like less than 1%, right?
Mhm.
And they're just going for these people ruthlessly. And like, meanwhile, every time that happens, women lose more footing, right? Like even this
Yep.
Tylenol issue, right?
Yep.
Well, guess who's going to suffer? Pregnant women.
Yeah.
Because that's the only thing that we're allowed to take when we're pregnant without damaging the baby. So now women are going to be in more pain, right?
Sure.
It's this, one step forward, two steps back, and just sort of missing the whole point. And I think, the one thing that I would like in this immigration topic, right? I see a lot of people saying things like, no one is illegal on stolen land. And I feel like this is a good example of it because it's like, I mean, that is not the response to the immigration. That is not the response.
Right.
No,
Read,
you
read,
can be
read,
you
read
can
the
be
room a little
illegal
bit.
on
Yeah.
stolen land. Every country has visa requirements. Okay, like we're not getting into like emotionally, theoretically, like yes, everyone should have housing and all that, but like you still can't go to Europe and just hang out for. You can't come to Costa Rica and hang out as long. That's not how
Hmm.
borders work. And so I feel like we lose the whole argument as soon as we start saying things like that. And I think that's kind of what pushes people away on the right because it's like it's too pie in this. It's too much, when the argument should be like, no, those systems are in place. This is how it works, right?
Yeah, you have to meet people a little bit where they are, and most people when they're discussing immigration do not come for a discussion of the colonization of the United States and the genocide of its indigenous populace, right? Those
Right,
two things did happen, and the fact that we have never as a culture properly reconciled or figured out what to do with that reality
right.
is its own distinct problem. But if
100%
you're
its
trying to
own
persuade
problem,
someone
exactly.
on what we should do about the real technical question of how to process the fact that this country, for because it is the world's largest economy, will continue to attract a large number of people who and because for its modern incarnation, the United States has presented itself to the world as the place where you come if you want a degree of safety, if you want systems that work, if you want systems that, if you want to know that you can build a life. And some of it is this kind of starry-eyed American dream stuff, and some of it is a much more calculated immigrant experience that things in the home country were dangerous, or there was deprivation or danger or degradation of some kind, and so as a result we need a new place. And I think it is, I think, hard in many ways to understand how wrenching it would be to move an entire family from the only home they've ever known to a new place. It's not something people do lightly, right? So, and certainly not to undertake the kind of journey that we're talking about, where you're talking about attempting to enter the country through, through an undocumented, through illegal means, through undocumented means. So, all of which is to say, there is we have, the United States will always attract, and part of, I think, this political project is to make it so unpleasant that it stops attracting people, which is no way to live. You don't want to live in a place so shitty that no one wants to move there. It's terrible. That's a bad idea. That's bad government. So, but we will always, because we're the world's largest economy, attract people who will want to live here and want to have opportunity. And when we be, and have systems that largely work. And it is reasonable to want to know who has arrived and when they arrived and where they're going to be. And there are some other checks that you will This there isn't the idea of having an orderly process is not an unreasonable one, and you can recognize that and I need to recognize that. And I think honestly, based on the work that we did last year, that was really all most of the people in our research in our and again, we don't do focus groups. We have a different process. So when I talk about a research group, I mean a panel of people gathered that we talk to individually. It's not everyone in a room. But
Right.
with our research groups, what we found was that was all people really wanted to know, was that there was a system in place that just sort
Right.
of tracked. They didn't even want people sent away. There wasn't very much anti-migrant sentiment at all. What there
Right.
was a need to know, we got to know who's coming in. We got to know, we got to know what, where they plan to live. And we got to know how to get in touch with them. Really basic stuff that the system does now actually provide for. It's just crazily overwhelmed, or has been in the past, crazily overwhelmed by the number of people who have sought refuge in the United States and tried to build lives there, as people have been for as long as the United States has been the United States and before.
I was talking with a client of mine, and she lives in Texas. She lives near a border town, and she has like a very different take on immigration, right? Because
I'll bet she does.
she had, her friends down the road where like some illegal immigrants came in and held them at gunpoint and killed them. And I mean, you know what I mean? Like really tough stuff. But like she probably represents 1% of the country who has those feelings and have had those experiences where you ask somebody in DC about immigration and they're going to go, I don't know what you're talking about. You ask somebody
Yeah.
in Southern California about, Mexicans, they'll talk to you for an hour and a half, right? So it really just kind of depends on who you ask and where you're coming from. But it doesn't seem like it was really an issue for anybody. And nobody wanted to watch families being ripped apart. And, I saw a news clip today where a 5-year-old autistic girl, they held her at the curb to get the dad to come out of the house. That's
Yeah.
illegal. That
Yeah.
5-year-old didn't do anything. Let
How
her
is that?
go.
How is that not a kidnapping?
How
It
is that
is.
not a kidnapping? And she
Yeah.
was
Right.
autistic. Like
Yeah. The American.
just to make
Yeah.
matters worse, right?
The degree of cruelty at work. And that's the thing is that, and the sad thing about this is that, you know, it has never been impossible. It's always been a doable proposition to get a plurality of Americans to either sign up for or to willingly turn their face from a degree of government violence and cruelty. Right? Like this project, I was just ranting a minute ago about how we've as a sort of culture, never really properly come to an understanding of what the genocide of America's indigenous population was, right? Like it just there has always been, and the long tail of the stain of slavery and all of these other tendencies of political violence, internment of Japanese during World War II. We're not going to go on a litany of America's various race sins alone. Leaving aside even the class question, you can make a very good argument that America fought a full second civil war 40 years after the first one between labor and capital, and labor lost. And that's why we don't talk about it all that much. But there was a ton of violence around that as well. You could always get, there's always a plurality of America that can be convinced to support or to turn away from some degree of state violence and cruelty. But what Americans were not signing up for was for that to be, and it seems incredible given what happened in the first administration, but what Americans were not signing up for was for that to be the principal occupation of their own government. Like what we are here for is masked men doing horrible things to innocent people. Like, as a country, we have some cultural limitations, but we are not that far gone. If Joe Biden got anything right at all, he was, I think, fundamentally right when he said Americans are decent people. And that really, like, I've had my doubts about that, but actually the work that we've done has really kind of reassured me. I really do think that's true. For the most part, Americans are decent people. We just, we're not signing up to cruelty to innocent people for no reason that we can possibly understand. And the thing is, that's what this administration is up for. And I think they just did not get it because their whole thing is they were making the sort of the classic mistake of any zealot, and a mistake that Democrats make a lot, which is they assumed that most Americans were like them without any reason to do so. And that's why I think one of the reasons this political project of theirs is falling apart so quickly is that, this is just not what people wanted. Now, the uglier question is how much of this would we have tolerated if they had managed to bring down prices rather than drive them up.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I don't want to say, oh, it would have been, we would have tolerated any of this. I really do think it's hard to sign Americans up for masked men holding 5-year-old girls, autistic girls at that, as hostages in order to draw out their parents, right? Like we do kind of like that is a pretty tough sell to make. But I think one of the lessons from the first Trump administration was, this is back before the cost of living explosion. You can get away with quite a bit of cruelty before people notice. And I think, to your point about the sort of changing stories around aid to Israel and what's happening in Gaza, around some of the other old stories, like I think that we are I don't know if we're at a point where we can go back to that anymore. I think we may be past that. It may be the George Floyd summer broke that. It may be what's happening now broke that. And we may be in a period now where our taste for turning away from cruelty is just we've just kind of lost it.
Well, and you combine that with these like corporate entities that are making all the money. So, for years, I have been railing against privatized prisons. To me, that is at the crux of all of this. Like as soon as they closed the plantations, Wackenhut literally bought the plantations and turned them into prisons. And so much of this, like I'm a chronic exaggerator, but like a large percentage of our prisons in the United States house illegal immigrants. So then you start to understand, well, maybe our border is a little looser than it could be because the government is paying Wackenhut for every single one of those illegal immigrants. And then they say, well, you want us to let this rapist free? He'll just come right back across the border. So they use these fear tactics. But most people don't even realize that Wackenhut is behind all of this and how much money. But now what's happening with these alligator Alcatraz, and people are starting to like trace the money, which is what we should have done 50 years ago, because the atrocities of Native Americans and slavery are still in existence. I mean, Listerine uses slave labor. I can't buy Listerine anymore, right? And that's one of the few that I know. But like, it is, when you really dig deep, it's like those things are still happening. And I think it's going to bring the light to all of it, just like it's bringing the light to Israel. It's like, you can't keep these things under wraps. And now we've got, 10 super rich guys while the country is getting poorer. And I think that Disney is a great, Disney is a great example. These fools forgot who's paying those subscriptions. Yep. They just it's like they've forgotten, like they've gotten so used to this money coming in that they forget who's sending it. And they realize that when they lost $4 billion and they're not going to get it all back, right?
Oh, yeah.
So it's like there's really like they've just been allowed to operate and continue to make money, and it really is a very small group of people. And I see that coming to a head, especially while Americans are getting poorer, right? Next month a lot of government contracts are going to be, coming to an end. I mean, we're just at the beginning of seeing how bad financially things are going to be for
Oh yeah.
Americans. And so I think
It's gonna
there's
get a
going to
lot worse before it gets better.
be a real like heads on stake kind of situation. I think people are going to get really sick of this 1% having all the money while we're doing all the work because we're the ones buying at Target. We're the ones spending at Disney. Like we're the ones paying for Starlink. Like if we all stop paying for it, they have nothing because that's all they are.
That's right. And they've been able to benefit by having a monopoly, right? And I think the next
Mhm.
political agenda is going to be breaking up monopolies, creating competition in places where there needs to be some. But the other thing is, this was a point that Ben Collins, the CEO of The Onion, made quite recently. This is a remarkable moment to build new things, new
Yeah.
alternatives, because
Yeah.
Americans do have money that they are prepared to spend on being entertained, right? The Onion
Right.
is a hugely successful, but it's, I mean, just it was kicked around by various private equity media companies who never understood what to do with it. And by all rights, it probably should have died. They kept writing funny stuff throughout. The quality, I don't think, ever really dipped. But, Collins was able to put together just off kind of, he's a political journalist who, off of his own steam and the desire to do something cool when the Onion came up for sale, found a way to keep it alive as a worker-owned entity. Defector Media is a great example of a worker-owned company that came about because private equity fucked all these people over the first time. And so they started their own thing. The ability to start our own things, and I'm not suggesting someone like you can't just snap your fingers and create a Disney Plus. But the point is, like, there is, like, on the other hand, you can create a lot of stuff. There are platforms, there are artists, and there is money out there that is smart enough to say, actually, like if people are willing to spend money on it, we'll take it, and we'll produce, and we'll conduct ourselves in the way that you would like a company to behave. So I think this is a reckoning not just for a couple of different political projects, but also for an entire capital model. And that's going to unfold slowly, unevenly, and painfully over a decade. But
Hmm.
I think you're right. This is a larger moment than a political one.
Yeah, because it's like everything is just a race to the bottom. It's a race to ruin everything. You see it in venture capital stuff like Riverside, the recording studio that didn't work for us just now. In their first year, they made $10 million. And then they got an investor and gave them $10 million. And then they were charging me 500 a month. And then they sent me an email saying I was going to have to pay 1,800 a month. And I was like,
Yeah.
did you all collectively fall down and hit your head on something at the same exact time? Like, it's this need for like, we gave you more money, now you need to make more money. And it's always money, money, money. And I just think that like people are really have had enough. And when you have like Spotify, perfect example, like everyone knows artists don't get paid. Rolling Stone doesn't even make money off of that. But the Spotify guy is like getting a new, skin built for his body, right? Like he's so rich, he doesn't know what to do. I don't think that's going to last. I think people are going to come for those people, especially when you look at them and you go, wait a minute. And these people are such sad, pathetic men that Bezos' wife, I'm not really into talking shit about women, but like, dude, you know what I mean? Like, come on, man. So,
Yeah.
like, we're letting these guys win. Like, we need to go for like the throats of these people. Not violence, but like cut their money off. And so I think this Disney thing was a great example of that. Like, we have so much more power than we realize, but we've just gotten so comfortable with how things are. So I think
Yeah.
as that comfort leaves, then it's like I think more people will wake up. I was thinking, about the podcast industry. It's one of the reasons why I love it, right? The democratization of information, right? We can get
Hmm.
on here and say whatever we want and release it to as many people as we want for free, right? It's phenomenal. And the podcast industry is having the same problem. There's like six guys and mergers and deals
Hmm.
and it's really the advertising execs that are not even in the podcast industry, and they're coming in and they're raping and pillaging and siphoning out millions of dollars out of the industry. And then the creator shops are all going bankrupt. And it's like, well, guys, there won't be anything to put ads on if they don't get. Like, there's this real disconnect between where everything is coming from and how they're making their money. And at some point, it's all gonna fall apart. And I think the United States is a lot like that. I think it's just a grander picture, and people the more money people are losing every month and the harder it gets, the less interested they're going to be in celebrating millionaires.
I think that's absolutely right. And there's a natural corollary to that. It is significant, I think, that the policy line that the Trump administration started with and has maintained most consistently and actually most viciously, even more so than their anti-migrant cruelty, has been they are adamant about holding back about monopoly, about the ability to create monopoly, and their monopoly is the ability of big corporations to form monopolies, the protection of monopolies, and the idea that they can threaten corporate monopolization efforts if like this is actually what the Kimmel thing was all about, right? Like there is an attempted merger, it's a desired merger
Right.
on behalf blah 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 blah. The
Right.
various network, like the big, the various corporate entities at the top of this thing that wanted a merger, and the FCC chair threatened that they might not be able to do that merger unless they got rid of Kimmel, right? Like that was what the whole thing was
Right.
actually about.
Right.
Folded like a cheap suit 4 days later. It doesn't matter, like that, like it is not insignificant that this administration that so often represents itself through acts of quotidian cruelty against people that they see as less human, against ordinary and defenseless people, its primary loyalty is to the idea of the corporate monopoly, which is the only way that you are able to get something like Spotify, right? Like you require like a properly competitive marketplace would not permit all of this stuff.
Right.
And it wouldn't permit, the sort of the natural move, and we're of late, let's do it. The natural move of late stage capitalism toward the minimalism, which is what is the shittiest version of this thing that I can sell that will still be accepted as this thing, which is, we see this across the board. I don't have to recite it.
Right.
Airlines are the best example of this. But like that's the direction it's been going. And I think what we may expect to see is the American people realize they're actually it's as consumers we have choices. Boycotts are useful. We've been there, there's something that is a powerful tool that Americans should not be afraid to use. But the other thing is there are people that we have hired to stop this shit from happening.
Mm-hmm.
They just haven't stopped it. But we can, and that I think is going to be, it's always been a particularly popular plank of the Democratic Party platform. But it's time that as a party, the Democratic Party gets really serious about this stuff.
Really
And
serious
and that's
about
one of the things that the that the Biden administration was good about. They really were good anti-monopolists. They really were good on labor. That's actually maybe the strongest part of that administration. But that simple reality, you hire us to stop this from happening. And by God, we will stop this from happening. Like if you pay a buck, you'll get a buck's worth of whatever it was that you paid for. We'll be like this notion of kind of returning some degree of democracy to the marketplace. I don't know if it's possible, but as a party, it's worth kind of cohering around. It's worth sticking our flag, saying not just we're going to fight to make this happen, but we will make this happen, and we expect you to hold us accountable for it. That's what we are here to do as a party.
Well, I mean,
And if
there's
we
no
can get to that place, then
right.
I think we're gonna. Then I think it'll be the next 10 years will be very different than the previous.
Yeah, I think it starts with like banning the stock trading with the lawmakers and stuff like that. Like I think we're
Right.
starting to see. It's like
It's a
why are all
day
these
one
people getting
act.
rich while we're and then you're asking me for $5 every time I open up Facebook. Like why don't you trade another stock, you assholes? You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like why are you asking me for money? You're
Yeah.
richer than all of us, right? Like
That's a day one pledge
right.
that should be executed immediately as soon as the Democratic Party has majorities and a president willing to sign it. Just like that.
And I think most people would agree with that because I mean it's just been so staggeringly corrupt in this, last
Yeah.
few months. It's well, forever, right? Pelosi,
Mhm.
right? Everybody's a hero and she's one of the worst ones about it, right?
Sure.
Um I think there is a real turning point and maybe it's the perfect storm. Maybe this is exactly what needed to happen as far as like people getting so poor that they're shaken out of their Amazon deliveries and their Hulu TV shows, right? Because we're all just like disassociating, basically. Like,
Hmm.
oh, I got my fancy mug, you know what I mean? My big water mug, so now I'm blending in, or I can Uber eat something, and so you have this idea, this security, but it's like, it could all be taken away so quickly. And when they round up all the migrants and get rid of everybody, and they're gonna look to American people that are so lazy they can't even like put a chicken in the oven, they gotta microwave it because they don't, you know what I mean? Like, who do they think is gonna do all this work? Then there's going to be no money to spend and the whole thing is going to come crumbling down because it's not about the American people, it's about money. Well, if we don't have any money to spend and nobody's
Hmm.
picking the vegetables, you
Yeah.
know, who's supposed to do all this stuff? You know what I mean? It's not going to be the American people that have become so disconnected from, I used to live in DC and everybody's like, oh, grass fed this and where's this come from? And I'm like, everything that we eat is brought in on a truck. Like there's like, nothing
Hmm.
is grown in DC. Like there's a couple little small projects, but like we're not
Yeah.
sustained. You know what I mean? This idea of like we're green and this is like, no, it's everything we consume is brought in on a truck. Like it's a city in the middle, we're really confused about the source of things and what it takes and how much
Yeah.
work because it just shows up, but it's not going to
Yeah.
just show up anymore. So we're not going to be willing to make it show up and be treated this way while the rich just keep getting richer.
The world that we want, I think that most, and again, I'm speaking pretty broadly here, and some of it is based on our research, and some of it is just me speculating wildly here. But like the world that I think most Americans want, again, one of a degree of security and comfort. I think it's becoming increasingly clear that that is not compatible with the degree of consumer comfort that we became used to during the early stages of the internet era, the digital era, right? When like you could get anything cheap overnight, right? Like the kind of Amazon Prime model. Like what we are starting to see is like is the external costs of that are coming home to roost. And there are all sorts of. I mean, that's a separate conversation for another day. But where I think I might leave you on this is there's a concept. This is a political concept, but I think it's going to happen in capital as well. There's the concept of the autocrat of the autocratization is the term for when a place becomes more autocratic. And there's the autocratization U, which is to say that it is very since the turn of the last centuries, in the 20th and 21st centuries, more often than not, when a country moves toward becoming more autocratic, it becomes more autocratic, and then very quickly becomes more democratic. And the democratic correction from that autocratization is stronger, and it ends up being more democratic than it was before the autocratization took place. And I suspect that we are seeing that in America right now. And I think that that is going to happen politically. And I also wonder if that isn't going to happen culturally, that we may not see, after the kind of autocratization, the monopolization of a lot of the digital world, that we may not see a greater democratization. And the question for all of us at that point is, great, it is more democratic, it is closer to what we've wanted. And also, there are some conveniences that we are not going to be able to have in the way that we had before, because it turns out that they were always too expensive for us to afford. We just weren't paying the sticker price when we paid it, and we got to pay it later. And so, are we going to be able to adapt to a new way of life? And that's the American strength. We are an incredibly adaptable place. That may be that's sort of the great claim to any kind of greatness that America may ever be able to level is that it's pretty good at reinventing itself. So can we change our expectations for what our lives are going to look like? Not by much, but by some, as we reclaim not just a more democratic political system, but a more democratic economy and a more democratic, small d democratic way of life.
I'm hopeful about that because I think that we're seeing like since the pandemic, people shifting into like canning and growing like homestead farms and living off grid, like a lot of, working remotely, reclaiming some of their life and going, wait a minute, I'm not giving you this, but people are kind of waking up a little bit and they're willing to accept a little bit less to get more of their personal life back. And I think that's going to like really shine on this. It's like, because a lot of those people, I know people that are making 120, 140K, they're just as broke as anybody else because they got a $800 car note and they got a $4,000
Yep.
mortgage and they got you know what I mean? Like it's never going to be enough. And the people that I know that make the most money are the most stressed out about losing it. They are the ones
Yep.
that never know when that email is coming from corporate and they're going to get fired. And so they are actually, while to somebody who's poor, looks like they're living the best life, they are not. They are consumed by money and they are worried about it constantly. And that was before Trump came in with his sledgehammer and started cutting people's jobs off left and right. These CEOs in big positions, you don't fix the whole company in 2 months, you're out, right? So like nothing is guaranteed. So I think that like when the dust settles, I do think Americans will be willing to live with a little bit less if they can feel good about it, right? Like even fast fashion. Right. Thank God for Netflix, honestly, because all these documentaries are really opening people's eyes to what's really happening out
Mhm.
there. Like I can't eat fucking calamari anymore because of that Octopus Friend documentary. You know what I mean? Like
That's the end of that.
it's
It's
too
the end of
much.
that. No more. We're
But
not. You're not allowed to eat octopuses anymore.
no,
Terrible.
I
Very
just can't.
sad.
I can't do it.
Yeah,
That's such
I'm
a
with you.
smart octopus. But I think people are starting to realize the impact that we're having, right? And
Mhm.
that maybe it's not worth it. And maybe that new thing that's not even that great anyway. Because we're all experiencing the inshitification of everything. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's like,
I'm surprised we didn't get that term in already, but yep,
you
that's
know,
exactly right. And that is, I mean, politics is downstream of culture, and you could make the argument that culture is downstream of economics, the whole point of this is these are interconnected systems, and they have all been enshittified in their own ways. And the next phase, whatever the next chapter of the American story is going to be, how we write that, and how we get it back to a how we get back that sense of like security and possibility that I think we last felt as an American in American politics during the run up to the first Obama administration. It's probably the
yeah.
last time we felt that. Almost 20 years ago. 20 years is a long time for a country to go without that kind of optimism and hope. And I think we can get it back, but we've got to get and we've got to get through where we are now, and we will.
Yeah. I think about like the Karen phenomenon. And I totally get it. Like we buy the extended warranty, but then when we go to use it, it doesn't work. Like we keep
Hmm.
playing by the rules. We keep paying for the nicer thing. We keep paying for the bigger size, but we don't get it. And I think that's what these meltdowns that people are seeing. Like I did what, you know what I mean? Why can't
Oh
I
yeah.
get my latte? And you're like, calm down, lady. But like at your core, you get it because we've all freaked out on some cell phone company employee, like when you've repeated yourself for the fit. Like we're all feeling that enshittification of it, and people are losing it, and we're taking it out on each other. But I think this administration is going to shine that light that it's not us. Like your neighbor, your Latino neighbor, is not
Hmm.
holding you down.
Yeah.
Jeff Bezos
They
is.
Yeah, yeah. Your Latino neighbor is also getting screwed,
Yeah,
probably more vigorously than you are.
way more
Like,
vigorous.
things are like, yeah, things are bad all around. And I think you're right. I think it is very real that we may see a different kind of American solidarity. And I mean, I'm not Pollyanna. There, as I said earlier, it has never been hard to get a substantial minority of Americans to endorse or to tolerate a staggering degree of cruelty. And I don't think that's going to change overnight. And at the same time, it is possible to create new generational cohorts of solidarity, right? Like we can come to see each other in new ways. And I think that that's the period we're barreling into right now.
Well, I hope so. I hope
Yeah.
so. Well, Frank, thanks for spending time with me, taking
No,
time
it's
to have
always a
this
pleasure.
conversation. I appreciate it for sure. Um, Well, if people want to learn more about Altima Insights or the work that you're doing, where can they connect with you? Where's the best place?
You can find me on Bluesky at Frank A. Spring, all one word, at Bluesky, where I am posting more regularly than I used to. And I will refer you to my little used Substack, Disorder Up. I'm probably leaving Substack for, I think, probably Ghost in the near future. But if you sign up for that, you want to read some of the stuff that I've written. I will be writing more once I make the platform change. But if you sign up now, you have the opportunity to be ported over. So
Nice.
that's Frank A. Spring at Blue Sky, and Disorder Up is my Substack.
Amazing. We'll have to talk about that because I'm ready to move off of Substack too. I'm not feeling
Yeah,
it.
it's not great. It's unfortunate, but there it is. Talk about enshittification. Good Lord.
Yeah. Amen. All right, Frank. Well, thank you again for your time. Thank you for tuning in to this podcast. Please leave us a review. They do go a long way. Share this with your friends, family. Hopefully, this gave you a little bit of optimism. Every time I talk to Frank, I feel a little better. I mean, we always talk about the truth and what's really happening, but it reminds me of the silver lining, right? Americans are, we're ridiculously overly confident about our abilities sometimes, but I think we're good people at our core, and I hope it'll reunite us eventually. It's gonna get darker before it gets light. But on that note, thank you for tuning in, and we'll catch you on the next one.